Ricardo Falcon was born on June 2, 1945, to Mr. and Mrs. Tony Falcon of Fort Lupton, Colorado. Ricardo grew up in an agricultural environment where it was assumed most Chicanos would drop out of school by age 14 and begin working in the fields. Fort Lupton was nationally known for its migrant camp and for having the second highest dropout rate in the state of Colorado for Chicanos. In 1970, Ricardo earned a BA in sociology and minor in history at CU Boulder. During this period, Ricardo became an active participant in the Chicano movement. For Ricardo Falcon, there was no higher purpose than to serve and bring about change for the Chicano community. Seeing the conditions in Fort Lupton, he saw the discrimination his parents suffered and how his siblings struggled to become educated. He remembers many of his friends leaving school to work as farm labor, and so it was natural that Ricardo would become an advocate for social change. At the CU Boulder campus, he was one of the founders of the United Mexican American Students Organization, UMAS, whose goal included recruitment of Chicanos and Chicanos to higher education. While at CU, he, along with several others, founded the Mexican American Correctional Helping Organization, which was dedicated to those incarcerated in the state prison at Canyon City. He worked tirelessly and undertook book drives. He met with prison officials to host conferences and cultural events. He believed that rehabilitation was possible. Ricardo never forgot about the community he came from and was a role model and advocate for Chicano and Chicana youth in his community of Fort Lupton. He held classes for youth on the history of Mexican people, where he taught about identity, history, and that education is liberation. He founded an organization of middle and high school students called Zapatistas. He worked with parents and notable community advocates. He and others challenged the deplorable living conditions at the Rice migrant camp. In 1970, Ricardo ran for sheriff of Weld County on a platform that would challenge corruption and discrimination. In late August of 1972, Ricardo Falcon and several other Chicano leaders from Colorado set out for El Paso, Texas, to attend a meeting of the La Raza Unida party. The radiator of Falcon's car started overheating while going through New Mexico, so they pulled into a gas station in the town of Oro Grande to fill it up with water. The date was August 30, 1972. Gas station owner Perry Brunson was a member of the segregationist American Independent Party, began arguing with Falcon and the occupants in the car. Ricardo told the group to stay in the car and that he would go pay. Upon approaching the station, Brunson fired several shots. 2 of them hit Falcon, who died on the scene a short time later. It was discovered that Perry Brunson was a member of George Wallace's American Independent Party. 50 years ago, Ricardo Falcon, at the age of 27, became a victim of racial violence. Ricardo Falcon is survived by his wife, Dr. Priscilla Falcon, and his son, Dr. Ricardo Falcon, Jr. Tonight we remember and celebrate the life of Ricardo Falcon.
Good evening, folks. My name is Dr. Priscilla Falcon. I have been a professor at the University of Northern Colorado for 29 years. I teach in the Department of Chicano, Chicana, and Latinx Studies, and I am also the widow of Ricardo Falcon. He was born in 1945. He grew up in Weld County, Northern Colorado, graduated from Fort Lupton High School, graduated with honors, was a part of the wrestling team. His father was a sharecropper. His father originated from Durango, Mexico, and traveled throughout the United States as a migrant worker. And I think as Ricardo grew into his manhood, I think this evolutionary process within the family affected what his stance would be in the Chicano movement. In 1970, I was married to Ricardo Falcon, and during that year, we had a son, Ricardo Falcon Jr., who was born in November of 1970. It was an exciting time for us, both as a family and as a member of the community. His family was excited. His mother worked in Boulder, and she would come over every day to help us with the babysit, and my sisters would help babysit. My 2 sisters were also at the university. And so Ricardo devoted a lot of time to community events and to community efforts. At this time, police brutality was a big issue in Fort Lupton. And so many times the 3 of us traveled to all the meetings and different events that were going on. One funny thing is this: without Mrs. Bravo in Fort Lupton, without Press Montoya, without Mrs. Nolasco, without Mrs. Sandoval, we'd have probably starved, because we never had food. We never took food with us to meetings and events, and they were always giving us $5 and $10 so we could go to protests here and there. And that's basically how we lived life, and that's how Ricardo lived life. He went to support students, whether it was at Adams State College, whether it was at UNC in Greeley, whether it was Manuel Lopez, who eventually became an attorney, but at the time was a student at UCD. And so I think Ricardo gained this statewide recognition for the contributions that he made during the Chicano movement. He believed that you had to go where the struggle was, and you had to defend people, and you had to defend the rights of students. At that point in time, the universities were taking punitive actions against students. And you have to remember that the context of the time was the decolonization in Africa. You had the Cuban Revolution. Many of us embraced the ideas of Che Guevara and the Brown Berets and the Black Berets, and those folks were mobilizing across campuses and across the state and the whole of the United States. And so it was a period of high activism. And Ricardo was able to embrace that activism, embrace family, embrace community, and move the struggle forward. After we were married, the family took a trip to Mexico, which is where Ricardo Falcon's father was from, to the little village actually of Guadalupe, Victoria in Durango, Mexico. And it was at that point that Ricardo really understood the roots of what it was to be Mexicano Chicano. He came back more invigorated, understanding more about the history of what we were promoting at the time as Atzlan, the indigenous side of our culture, how deep our roots were, and how folks had to be displaced from Mexico, come into the United States, and really they became the working class backbone for a lot of the activities that were happening in Weld County. And that is really where his father assumed the position of a sharecropper in northern Colorado, and his mom worked the fields and other jobs. And so I think that really impacted why he became an advocate and a strong defender of the Chicano movement.